All right. Hello, everybody. Today we are here with Anusha Singh. She is a part of Period, which is a huge organization fighting period poverty. And just to preface a little bit for this interview, recently here, two of the states, Anusha's from Ohio in the United States, and I'm from Michigan. And recently, both of these states and their tampon taxes have recently been abolished. So it was something that was really exciting for us. And today we're just kind of going to be talking about that and the advocacy part of it and how we went on to get there.
Hi, I'm so excited to be on here. Thanks so much for having me, Nupur.
Mhm. Yes, we're very excited to have you. So just to start off a little bit, just if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and how you kind of got involved in this mission.
Yeah, so my name is Anusha Singh. I love the introduction. So amazing. I am 22 years old from Columbus, Ohio. That's where I live right now. Neuroscience major, aspiring healthcare professional. Um, and I also am the national campaigns lead at Period nonprofit right now. So I'll talk about that a little bit later, but like more in detail. But yeah, Period is basically a youth dominated nonprofit with the goal of fighting period poverty and period stigma.
All right. Yeah. So we've seen a lot of what Period has done. If you guys want to ever check out their website or their Instagram, they've done so many amazing projects, hosted so many rallies, and really played an integral part in the advocacy in the United States and around the world as well. So what does, I guess, the organization, how did you start to become a part of it, and what does it mean to you?
Yeah, no, that is a really good question. So for me, I feel like I like how getting in. I decided to get involved because for me, it's about like taking back power and reclaiming power over not just my period, but what society tells us about periods. And specifically, when I remember when I was first exposed to stigma around periods, I mean, I would technically say that I was part of this movement way before I technically got involved with period. As early as the fifth grade. I don't know if you had this at your school, but I remember when we first learned about menstruation, we learned about it in gender segregated classrooms, right?
Yeah.
The boys and the
Yeah.
girls are separated
Hmm.
into two different classrooms. And that's when I first learned about, oh, like this is what menstruation is at school. And I remember right after our lecture, our teachers really instructed us to sort of hide the pads and tampons that we received from this educational seminar. And in the back of my mind, I was only like maybe 10 years old at the time, but I thought, why is it that something that, our teachers talked about being, so natural, half the population
Hmm.
experiences this, why is it that it's so stigmatized? Like, why is it that it's not normal to talk about such a normal issue? And I think very early on, I began questioning it, but I just didn't know what to do.
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
that really just over time and repeatedly throughout my life, and I'm sure you might relate to this, I was exposed to like the stigma around periods, and that motivated me to finally in college start a student organization at my university, and it's a period chapter, so the chapter of the larger nonprofit to fight period poverty and stigma locally in Ohio. And that led us to advocating for the repeal of the tampon tax in Ohio and a lot of other things. So yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to the part where you said, I remember in fifth grade it was they had us separated into classrooms. There were girls and boys, and we had to we watched this video, and I remember we all got out and none of us wanted to talk to anybody else about it. We all just like kept each other quiet. We're like, yeah, no, this is gross. We're not allowed to talk about it. No one can know. So it was like crazy. Yeah, now that I think about it.
No, that's so
Yeah.
true. It perpetuates this shame or this idea that periods are
Hmm.
not natural and they're an illness. Totally agree.
Right. Yeah, yeah. And being from, I guess, Indian heritage, what does that mean to you in like the context of menstrual equity and what you do now, and how you feel about it overall?
Yeah, so yeah, my Indian heritage is super important to me.
Hmm.
I think it was interesting because I've lived both in the United States and in India. So I lived there for 5 years. Um, and I was very aware about the fact that, the period stigma is present, is very present in cultures there, but it's also like, I don't want to generalize either. because I know in some cultures, as India is such a
Mhm.
diverse country,
Right.
and it's so, so diverse, and, every community is so different, but I think, being exposed to another sort of ramification of period stigma, like, people not being allowed, like, my friends would open up to me about this sometimes, like, not being allowed to go to the temple, like, simple things like
Mhm.
that, and I don't wanna generalize, like, for every community either, because I know every community in India is different, I also spoke to friends who talked about how it's celebrated in their
Mhm. Yeah.
it's so like, everyone's experiences are so different, but I think what was interesting was when I moved back from India to the United States, that was during my junior year of high school. I was really shocked to learn, especially when I was starting my organization in college, interacting with patients at the hospital that literally bled through their pants because they did not have
Mhm.
access to period products. I just was so shocked that this was a problem in the richest country in the world, right, in the United States.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, because prior to this, I thought this is only an issue in developing countries and,
Mhm.
obviously very prevalent in India. There are so many steps being taken. But I think, moving back here and saying, wow, like this is also an issue here at home, in the United States. So I remember that really motivated me to like want to address it somehow.
Yeah, I think a lot of us here, it's that's a huge reason it's overlooked. Like period poverty, we think about it, it's like, oh, something that only happens in developing countries. But you look at here and there are so many people below the poverty line, so many menstruators who are affected by this. And it's such, I think, an important issue to address that a lot of people don't really look at, I guess. Like I know when I first talked about this at my high school, a lot of people, like teachers, students, were like, "Wow, I didn't even know this was a problem." So yeah,
Yeah.
that was really crazy to me as well. So, shifting gears a little bit, we did talk about how the tax was lifted in Ohio and Michigan. So, in terms of that, like, what do you think? I guess the key step is in making real political change when it comes to this.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think so. First and foremost, I think it's so important that like people listening to this podcast or this live know that you're already an activist. You don't have to like I think sometimes people can feel intimidated by the fact like, "Oh, I'm not an activist, like how do I do anything?" or "I'm not a lobbyist or a policymaker," right? I feel like initially when I was getting involved in this movement, I remember really wanting to make change, but I questioned like, "I'm just a student, how will
Mhm.
anyone ever take me seriously?" Right? I think that's a question like, will my voice even matter at the end of the day? How much is possible? Right? But I think the more I got involved with advocacy efforts
Mhm.
in Ohio and even nationally through leading different campaigns, I learned that it's, people are already activists, people are already part of this movement. It's all about being brave enough. Like, you are here today talking to me about periods. It's about being brave enough to even talk about this issue. And oh, hi, Ranu. That's not a comment on the screen. But but it's all about being, and I know that sounds so cliche, but really like
Mhm.
some of the bravest activists I know are actually a group of Girl Scouts from Ohio who also testified. They were probably like 10 years old and they testified in front of legislators, sharing their first period stories. And really, that's a huge deal because they are actually, by doing that, they are changing culture. They're normalizing this issue. And that's the
Mhm.
single largest barrier to fighting period poverty, right? Unlike so many other issues out there, like food insecurity, for example,
Mhm.
uh, a huge reason why we don't talk about period poverty and hence don't address it is because of the stigma. So by
Right.
normalizing it, and I think young people are so uniquely positioned to do this. Like we have TikTok, we have social media, you have this amazing platform here. Like there's so many ways we go about normalizing this conversation. And that's a huge way that will eventually translate to policy change. So a lot
Mhm.
of policymakers, I actually met with Representative Julie Brixey from
Oh,
Michigan,
okay.
one of like the champions behind this issue in Michigan, behind repealing the tampon tax, and she told me that the reason she got behind this was because of young people, because of
Mhm.
I think her children actually approached her and talked about this issue, and they're like, "What are you doing about it?" So I think you should never underestimate, yeah, the power of your voice, and there's so many ways about going about it, right? So um, you can use social media, I mentioned, meeting with legislators, testifying, which is basically you present your case in front of your lawmakers. You could submit
Mhm.
written testimony, you could testify in person, organizing rallies and demonstrations if you're really wanting to go out there and organize.
Yeah.
There's so many different ways, and no 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 single way is like too small. Like, I'm trying to word this,
Mhm.
but like there's no each and every way is super effective and powerful. It could be having a conversation even. So they're all super effective.
Yeah, totally. Seeing how far we've come from like 2 years ago, we had that rally, I remember, at the University of Michigan, and just seeing how far we've come, it's, the same people and so many new advocates have joined. There's just, it all just really makes a difference. So that was really great to see. Yeah, so with this like tax being lifted and all, obviously people are looking towards like what's next. Like we have this,
Mhm.
there's so many more steps to take. So personally, what do you think comes next after this?
Yeah, so I think what comes next is access legislation. Access to period products in schools. So I really think the tampon tax repealing it is kind of the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to it. Like, it is a great starting point, amazing starting point, and really started a whole conversation about menstrual equity, right?
Mhm.
Right on the heels of the tampon tax repeal. And I know we both met at the signing ceremony in Ann
Yeah.
Arbor, which was amazing. Like, shortly after that, it was amazing to see how Ann Arbor made, I'm sure you saw this too, Ann Arbor made
Mhm.
um, uh, period products free in all like public restrooms,
In
which
all the
is
public
amazing to
restrooms,
see.
yeah.
And like talk about how much momentum this is generating, how much, in a single month, all of this is happening. And, and so many other states are kind of looking at Michigan and all the advocacy efforts there and really wanting to replicate it, advocate for
Mhm.
in school districts on the state level as well for access to free menstrual products, and really
Mhm.
prioritizing some of the more vulnerable populations, like having access to free menstrual products in schools, also prisons and shelters. Really, those are the three main areas that we like to focus on first.
Mhm.
But I think it's a great step taken by the Ann Arbor City Council to
Yeah.
this policy. Yeah, to really enact this policy. So, um, yeah, access.
No, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I saw that was really cool. It was like right after the bill signing, and it's just really amazing to see how that itself can educate more people about what's going on and kind of open the conversation and like break the stigma surrounding it as well. And yeah, it's great to see that that's going on in universities and campuses. Do you think that there's anything that we can do in like elementary schools or even middle schools when young menstruators are starting their periods besides just like giving them free menstrual products? Is there anything that we can do there to break the stigma surrounding menstruation and periods in general?
Yeah, for sure. I think one thing you can do is hold educational workshops. I know that is something that I've been wanting to do for a while too, is like
Mhm.
go into middle school or elementary school. And I think it would be so amazing to see, because something that I love about our generation, Gen Z, is that like we are like not afraid to, challenge the status quo, right? We're not afraid to
Mhm.
talk about something that society has deemed for the longest time ever a taboo, right? And I think having those types of role models, like younger role models there in a classroom setting, speaking about menstruation, that would be amazing. But I think definitely holding educational workshops in schools, talking about menstruation, talking about different types of period products, right? That are out there, including sustainable alternatives. I think that could be very cool. But also, I would love to see, young people, actually, so for National Period Day, I spearheaded the National Period Day campaign a few years ago.
Mhm.
And under that campaign, more than 60 rallies were organized across all 50 states and four more countries, which is absolutely incredible. And the craziest thing is that most of these rallies were organized by young people, younger
Mhm.
than 25 years old, and as young as 13 years old. That's a middle school student there. Um, and I remember in Indiana, there was a student, 13-year-old student, who organized a rally, and it was phenomenal. She invited her, elected officials, and I think that really sends a really powerful message that young people can really, make a difference, like make their voices heard. And it was really cool to be able to like help with that too. And my whole goal is trying to find ways for some of the younger populations to really plug in into like these advocacy efforts, because for so long we've been told like, oh, like you need to be a lawyer or you need to hold like a PhD in like menstruation studies or something like that to to make your voice heard. But I think that's so far from the truth. And so the
Mhm.
more and more I see young people testify in front of lawmakers, share their stories, maybe even write to their legislators. And the craziest thing is like they keep all of the letters you send them. Like I've met legislators and I've sent them thank you cards after meeting with them.
Mhm.
And literally have it like, all on their like bulletin board in their office. Like they really care about this. They really want to hear from students, even if you're not eligible to vote. Like there are so many, even if you're younger than 18, there's so many ways you can still make an impact. Holding community events, and even for college age students who want to go into like middle schools, elementary schools. I think that would be so appreciated.
Yeah, so for all of you watching, as you can tell, literally anything you do can definitely make an impact. Write letters, just simply just having a conversation with your family members or your peers or your colleagues, anybody can really either break the stigma or work towards a more political side of it, so literally anything. And Anusha, as an aspiring a healthcare professional, how are you going to use everything that you've learned from all of your experiences and kind of implement that into your career and your goals for the future?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I love it. So I think there's a huge connection between like menstrual equity and health equity because, menstrual hygiene is a human right, right? And so I think it's crazy to me, especially when I was volunteering at the hospital, the story that I was telling you before, um,
Hmm.
and meeting patients who literally bled through their pants, or even volunteers at the hospital who talked about how there wasn't access to period products, and and they were too, like in a hospital setting. I remember feeling so shocked about that, so I actually raised it to the hospital's administration. I raised it to my volunteer coordinator first, and I was like, hey, this is crazy. Why is it that free menstrual products are not provided in the hospital, right? And you couldn't even buy it anywhere, right? Like finally they opened a small section in the gift shop, and this is in Ohio Health Hospitals, and one of the largest hospital uh, what's it called hospital networks in the country, which is crazy.
Uh-huh.
So I was just so shocked about it. I raised it to the vice president of the whole like hospital network. Oh, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here, don't worry.
Oh, okay.
You're good.
Yeah, no, but I remember feeling so shocked about that, raising it to the hospital administration, and they finally got free menstrual products all like in the hospital, which is amazing.
Hmm.
But I really think that my passion for this comes from wanting to advocate on behalf of my future patients as well, right?
Hmm.
They should not have to worry about when they're going to hospital for another emergency, like whether they have access to period products or not. And similarly, I think it's absurd that menstrual products are taxed in still, I think, 26 more states as
Hmm.
as luxuries rather than as medical necessities, right? Medical
Right.
necessities are exempt from the sales tax, and so it really sends a very poor message to menstruators. And I think it's so important that this is part of the health equity conversation too. And also the CARES Act, which it was like a while ago, they included a provision classifying menstrual products as medical necessities,
Mhm.
and having an I'm trying to find the term for it, but having an option for people to purchase it at a reduced cost to you know, help with fighting period poverty during the pandemic. So that was a huge step. I know Congresswoman Grace Meng is a huge champion for menstrual equity. She helped advocate for that on the national level. So we're seeing, like, I wouldn't be surprised if in the next few years, like, there is federal menstrual equity legislation, right?
Mhm.
That
Yeah,
actually,
that would be really amazing to see. Yeah. Yeah, building off of the whole tax and everything. Yeah.
and
It's
oh, sorry, another
No, go keep going, keep going.
I'm actually working on a research project with a physician right now on how period poverty or the lack of access to period products affects patients.
Mhm.
And it's so interesting because lack of access to period products can leave patients susceptible to really dangerous infections like toxic shock syndrome, and something like that can even be fatal. So I think it's
Mhm.
so important to talk about, these public health crises and, alongside medicine because it
Mhm.
definitely impacts like patient care and things like that. And yeah, I think that's another reason why it's important to focus on this.
Yeah, definitely. And with all these social issues, social justice issues also involved in healthcare, what do you think makes the fight for menstrual equity so different from the other social justice issues that people are working towards?
Actually, that's a good question. But I would actually argue that, like, menstrual justice in many ways is healthcare justice, is
Mhm.
racial justice. I argue racial justice because a lot of times Black and Brown communities are some of the most affected by issues like period poverty. So really, it's like super connected to these movements. You know, there are people who advocate for sustainable menstrual products, and they would argue like menstrual justice is also environmental justice. So it's like
Mhm.
I think it's so connected to a lot of these other movements. Like, I think sometimes people, think about, like, the menstrual space being, like, a completely own, box on its
Mhm.
own, like, its own niche, but actually I think, like, it's so connected to the other social justice movements that you were just talking about, and, I think yeah, it's so important, like, if you're passionate about those other issues, like, you're already part of the menstrual movement, right? Like, just by
Mhm.
caring about, because you know, the whole goal is to, like, fight for some of these underprivileged populations who don't have access to these period products, and also, populations that have, like that face barriers because of the stigmatized nature, so the, LGBTQ community and things like that, so
Yeah, no, definitely. And something that you mentioned that I guess I like didn't even think of before, the environmental justice part of it, buying products that are eco-friendly, that are reusable like Diva cups or menstrual cups, that can really make a great impact on our environment as well. And if those of you watching you're interested in environmental justice issues and all of that, that would be a great way to join both of those movements and kind of work towards both things at the same time, kind of breaking down the stigma and involving eco-friendly and green products. Yeah, definitely. So, how do you have any advice, I guess, for young women or advocates or menstruators who want to get into advocacy, who really want to go on like a much bigger and global scale, but they're just getting started? So, yeah.
Yeah, I think I remember being in the like, I remember being really afraid in the beginning when I was first getting involved, because I remember wanting to advocate for this. So I would say, like, don't be afraid to set up that meeting with a stakeholder, whether it's like, a decision maker on your school board or it's like a legislator. If you want to really seriously like advocate for this, or even just meet with them and talk about why you care. Something that I didn't know when I was first getting involved was like, I had memorized all the facts about period
Mhm.
poverty, period stigma, everything. But then I realized, wow, like a lot of these like, decision makers, they really want to know about why you care about this. Like, why are you passionate about it, right? Because at the end of the day, they're human beings and they like to connect with stories. And something
Mhm.
that I've learned is like your story really matters, like about why you care. Um, every single meeting that I've ever attended, whether it was with the hospital administration that I volunteered at, or um, literally with politicians, they all ask me the same question: why are you passionate about this, and why, because that kind of shows them like why they should care too. And
Mhm.
they obviously care about what their constituents care about, what their what people in their state care about, right? Because he holds a lot of power in electing or elected officials, organizing, putting that pressure on them to really prioritize these issues. So just making your voice heard. It could be as simple as meeting with them, or even,
Mhm.
writing a letter to them. Um, we did a letter writing campaign once, and students sent hundreds of letters to different Congress people. And some of them actually ended up co-sponsoring federal legislation that was introduced. And that's still a win, right? Convincing your representatives to really prioritize this. But I think the biggest thing is that don't be afraid. It could be daunting at first, but I think the fact that like the first step is always the hardest, and it's honestly about being brave enough. Like, you're at the end of the day, your story matters, and you have the I really do think like that's the hard part. The hard part is being brave enough to even do it, and then you'll kind of learn along the way, like different ways you can make your voice heard, whether that's speaking at press conferences or organizing them um, or lobbying legislators. But I think, yeah, really putting yourself out there, whether that's making a TikTok or whatever. Um, but there's so many ways.
Yeah, and for non-menstruators who kind of have that mindset where it's like, "Oh, this issue doesn't pertain to me. I don't know how I can get involved with this, it doesn't really affect me." How can we kind of shift the mindset surrounding that?
That's a really good point. I think it's so important to not, preach to the choir only.
Mhm.
When I was first starting my chapter at the Ohio State University, I actually approached some of my male non-menstruating friends and I was like, "Hey, I would love for you to join me." And at first they were like, "Oh, interesting," but um, like but then I think educating people who don't menstruate about periods is so important too because it's so important to have allies in this movement to really affect real change. And, unfortunately, like in positions of power, we don't have that many women. So it's so important to have allyship and be able to work together, whether it's with menstruators, non menstruators, everyone. So I just think that, yeah, it's so important to draw other people into the conversation because how will you ever normalize something if you only like speak to like half the population that already experiences it? So
Right.
I think that was so important for me even when I was starting my chapter at Ohio State.
Mhm.
Yeah, like meeting with legislators. Um, oftentimes they were older white men, right, who do not relate at all. But um, so it's so important to make them feel like they're part of the change too, and that we
Right.
need to work together to achieve this.
Right, because this could literally be affecting could be their mom, their sisters, their daughters, their wives, it could be anybody that it's affecting, yeah,
Exactly,
anybody close to them. Like, chances are you know somebody who menstruates. But
exactly, exactly. Like
yes.
that's such a good point, right? Like that was so effective when it came to like I remember when we were lobbying legislators last month in Michigan, they really related to us when we would kind of reference like I am a daughter, like I am a sister, or I am a wife of something in our group of like people lobbying because I think they could sort of visualize that and think about someone in their life that they knew, just like you mentioned.
Mhm. Right, yeah. So, okay, personally for you, and for you and for period, I guess, what are some I guess upcoming projects or events that we should be looking forward to, looking out for?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So for period, we are trying to so the model, I the coalition model to take down the tampon tax in Michigan was super effective. So we're trying to figure out how do we replicate this in other states too. So many activists from other states have actually reached out and want to sort of take that next step of like advocating for whether it's the tampon tax or access to free menstrual products, and there's like statewide. So they've reached
Mhm.
out wanting to address that. So I'm super excited to see like what state we pick next. We're still kind of like figuring that out. Trying to be super strategic about it. But also like personally, I'm involved with quite a bit of research, like I mentioned earlier, about periods. So that's something I'm like looking to do. Researching both like a couple different projects. So one of them is a clinical research project where we're
Mhm.
looking at um, how does period poverty affect patient populations in Columbus, Ohio? And
Oh,
yes, we,
okay.
we have like a national study too that we did, like Period did with Thanks, that revealed that 1 in 4 students are actually affected by period poverty and don't have
Um,
access to period products, which was so shocking. But I think sometimes when it comes to, some of the most effective studies are the local studies when it comes to changing policy locally, which is something that we're realizing. So we're working on a research study in Columbus, looking at period poverty, the prevalence, how it affects patient health, like different ways it
mhm.
affects that. And then I'm also working on a policy project along the lines of health policy. So yeah, quite a few like different intersections going on. So I'm excited about that. Hopefully on track for a publication by April. So
Yeah, it seems like you're involved in a lot of great things. And yeah, for those of you watching, if you ever want to check out what's going on there, it's really interesting, I guess, period as a whole. And Anusha, also the research that you're doing, I'm sure that's going to impact a lot of people and be really helpful. And yeah, is there anything that you'd like to add for the viewers or just in general to put out there?
Ooh, you can follow period at period movement. I can like type it in the chat. I don't know if this pops up, but like yeah, at period movement, and then my at is at Anusha underscore Singh without the H, but plug.
Yeah, hopefully that shows up. If not, I'm in the Instagram post, Anusha's account is tagged, and you can also find period movement in her bio and everywhere else on her account as well, if you would like to follow. And yeah, so thank you guys so much for watching. Anusha, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you had a good time. I definitely did talking to you and learning about all of your insights, your projects, and everything else. So yeah, thank you so much.
Oh no, I am so glad. I'm so excited to be talking to you, and it was a great conversation. And I'm so excited to see what you do, like over your years during undergrad.
Thank you.
You're so involved in this movement already, you know. And I think this, yeah, I'm really excited to watch everything you do too.
Thank you so much. All right. We will see you guys next time on Pink Talk International. Bye.
Bye.